we grow up with so much shame around sexuality, in some cultures more than others. But even in the West, it's kind of like this thing that we don't speak about explicitly. Even like in cinema, when we see sex, it's not like real sex. Women are having sex all the time with the brown. And I'm like, have you had sex? You know?
Welcome to Bitch Talk. I'm your host, Erin.
And I'm co-host Ange, aka Captain Party.
And for more than 11 years, the show has celebrated underrepresented voices in pop culture and beyond.
But not in the snore kind of way, which is why our listeners and followers have graciously voted us Best of the Bay, Best Podcast on 48 Hills for 3 years in a row. Three-peat, bitches.
If you like what you hear, follow us on Instagram and check out our website, Bitch Talk Podcast, and rate us wherever you listen to podcasts.
We're begging you to judge us. When does that ever happen? Oh, you're not going to say anything?
Oh, what'd I say?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, on that note, on with the show. Clink. All right, Bitch Talk, we are talking about a very exciting movie that is available right now on Amazon Prime. It's called Girls Will Be Girls, and we're sitting down with the director/writer, Shuchi Talati. Welcome to Bitch Talk.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so can you introduce this film to our audience?
Sure. So, Girls Will Be Girls is the story about a 16-year-old girl, a very uptight top student at a very conservative boarding school in the Himalayas, and in a place where dating, or forget dating, even holding hands is forbidden. And she falls in love with this new boy who's sort of foreign returned and thinks the school is parochial. And she begins to explore this forbidden romance. Uh, and then her mother finds out about this relationship. And you would think she'd be a very traditional Indian mother who would be like, no dating, not at all. But instead, she wants to give her daughter more freedoms than she has and tries to permit the relationship and gets to know this boy, and things get complicated and weird. How's that?
Yeah, that's exactly how I felt through most of the film. I was like, oh,
Felt it again as you were describing it.
Yeah,
I was like, oh.
I felt all the feelings, Suchi. I do want to ask first about your lead actors. They are wonderful, and I want to ask, how did you get them to be as vulnerable as they were on screen?
Thank you for that question. Uh, First, honestly, that is a quality that I'm looking for when we're casting. I really think that you can't, as a director, teach an actor to act. Like you really are shaping a performance. So when people come in to audition, I'm looking for, are they just hitting the beats? Because many trained, wonderful actors can do that. They move from beat to beat. They do a sharp script analysis. Or does it feel like they're living in these moments? Does it feel like they're allowing for unexpected things that happen? Human beings are so strange. When you're angry, you might smile because it's not safe to express your anger, or you feel weird about being angry. You don't want to be that person. So I'm looking for that in their auditions. And then when they come in, I really try to create an atmosphere of play. And I start that from the audition. I'll say, we'll do many takes, and that doesn't mean that you did something wrong, but we are trying to explore this scene and find all these layers. So I will really say, okay, let's try this where your intention is to be condescending. Try this where you're trying to punish her. Try flirting with her. And that change of intention can change every line. It can change the scene. So I try to foster this early so that they know on set that there is nothing wrong. We're trying to discover together. I also give them a fair amount of freedom to always say, hey, that didn't work for me. Can I change the line? I always say, you can say to me, Shuchi, can I do another take? And I will almost never say no unless we're like really behind schedule. So to really create this atmosphere of trust and play, and then specifically in this film, there's a fair amount of intimacy. There are all these, scenes involving sexuality and not just any sexual, it's like a teenage girl's sexuality. So you have to do it in this delicate way where on the one hand, want to be very honest about it and be like, there's masturbation. This is what it looks like when you try and look at your vagina for the first time, and you're like, ew, weird. or or how it feels like you're have this insecurity about a body part that your partner's gonna touch for this first time. So I want to be explicit about these things and yet not sexualize this young girl, you know, and also make her feel very safe about taking these risks and doing this, especially given that India is pretty conservative about sexuality. And so you're worried about everyone from your parents and your uncle and auntie and grandma watching this at some point. Um, so, yeah, and that sexuality, if you want me to talk about it, that's totally a different type of process, its own thing.
Yes, please do, because I'm just going to say I had stuffed animals too. We'll leave it at that.
Look, this apparently because Aunt is a very good friend of mine as well, but another good friend of ours, it was her. Sorry, but she called it her hard-nosed baby. And so so then I'm wa I'm watching this and
Yeah.
just thinking about my friends as little girls. Anyways, that sounds weird and complicated also. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Ann.
No, so that was going to be my question, because you do such a good job of making it feel very natural and not exploitative at all. And I was literally that kid. I mean, and I'm sure a lot of us were. So please do get into the intimate scenes that could be real touchy. Oh, literally. Sorry.
Yeah, and I
Literally.
will say about this specific stuffed animal scene, that when we were shooting it, we had a crew of many women, and so whenever we were shooting anything that involved intimacy, it was only the women on set. And I will say there were a lot of tips in that room. I think there was a lived experience.
A lot of hard-nosed baby talk or
Yeah.
the
Oh,
coyote.
So everyone was like, not just me, you too.
That's a different conversation. Sorry.
Different conversation. So, my think about sexuality, and my previous films have also dealt with sexuality. So I kind of developed a way of working with actors, and a way of articulating to myself what is really important to me in these scenes, which is the emotional conversation that is happening. I always say it's about being emotionally explicit, not physically explicit. So this is something that I explained to the actors early. I was like, this scene is like any dialogue scene, and we are exploring how your relationship changes through this interaction, what you discover about each other. Do you build trust? Do you lose trust? Uh, and that's what we're trying to photograph. And so that's the intention in the writing. And then as we start to work with the actors, very early on, I say it's super strange to be touched by another person because in this setting that is kind of artificial. So you might not feel anything, or you might feel something because touch will evoke feelings, and both of those things are okay, and you have to allow it, and you have to not judge yourself. Like whatever happens is okay. And then I kind of and then we try and negotiate, what is really understand, what is comfortable. Many films now can work with an intimacy coordinator, which was unfortunately not an option for us in India because there are very few intimacy coordinators, and that makes them very expensive. And so they're accessible to the big budget films, but not to us. So, and so I have to be very aware of this power dynamic because actors kind of want to please a director, which is where an intimacy coordinator can be a person that they can go to and say, hey, I'm not comfortable doing that because as friendly as I am and as great a relationship they have, they do want to make me happy, you know.
Mm.
So I try to stress that they can really say, this touch is not great, I don't want to do that, and feel comfortable that I will listen. And so we try to choreograph scenes alone before we're shooting. And then I'll bring in the cinematographer and we'll take photographs of the shots we're thinking and say, okay, this is how you're going to look on screen. Is this okay? And then kind of do that process again on set. When we set up a frame, usually have a very strict policy where the actors are not allowed to look at monitor because it's already so vulnerable to feel your scene, and I don't want them to look at themselves and be like, "Oh, I look weird," and then be pulled out of the scene. So, but for the intimate scenes, I always take a screenshot and I'll bring it to them and say, this is the shot. Are you okay with this? And there was one time that one of the actors asked for a change, and we're like, okay, we'll change it. So to create that space where they always feel like they can say something and they feel confident that they'll be heard. And and then finally, like about the actual sexuality, I'm not squeamish about sex. So I can, talk very like openly, like, okay, like, yeah, so that like you're coming over there and maybe it didn't feel realistic because maybe it was too short, or I didn't quite feel like the moment of like the penis entering the vagina. Like I can say that and I'm not shy about it. So I try to model for the actors and the crew that we grow up with so much shame around sexuality in some cultures more than others. But even in the West, it's kind of like this thing that we don't speak about explicitly. Even like in cinema, when we see sex, it's not like real sex. Women are having sex all the time with the brown. And I'm like, have you had sex?
Mm,
So there
true.
is a kind of shame around it. So I tried to model something different. And I think actors pick up on it, uh, and we work through it slowly, like and sensitively if we can.
I appreciate that, and knowing that you're so open with your actors and everyone on set about that language. It changes how people look at sex, especially if they have to be in frame and look like they're doing it. Um, I had a question, and you kind of talked about it in that last answer, but the lighting and the framing in the film is really beautiful, especially when they're in the home. Can you talk about your DP and your lighting person?
I love my DP. Her name is Jui Pang, and she has been a longtime collaborator. She shot my last short film. And I have to say, it's a big part of making actors feel so comfortable also when we're doing, delicate material. Because sometimes the DP is the person who's closest, like physically closest to the actors, and she can really hold space. Uh, she's wonderful. And in the house, thank you for noticing. So this film is mostly about photographing subtext. There is so much that is unsaid. There is so much in the behavior. There is so much in that cup of chai that is not given. That is so much in who is left out of the room and who is in the room. There is this trio that forms between the girl, the boyfriend, and the mother. And there are these shifting allegiances, and someone is always on the ins and somebody's always on the outs. And so we were searching for a visual language where we could photograph this. And it felt like when we were searching for the house, we saw 50 houses before we settled on this one. And it was really important that you could see from one room into the other. Like certain sight lines were very important because we knew we wanted to use frames, the doors and the windows, to create sometimes this separation. There are many times that the mother is on the outside and the two, young people are on the inside. Or when Mira, the lead character, the girl, she's left out. So to try and tell that story visually. And then you mentioned the lighting, which is also very important because there are two primary spaces that this film takes place in. There's the school and there's the home. And the school has this, navy blue uniform, this very straight lines, and this kind of coolness to it. And as opposed to that, there's the home, which is the mother's domain, which is warmer, richer, has this, slashes of hard golden light through it. And that was important to us to create this warmth and yet use this light, which is sometimes a kind of hard light, which enhances, I think, the drama and the visual, uh, kind of underscores the emotional conflict that is happening. And this is one of Jui's specialties. She always gets asked, she's like, "Oh, wow, you shot it in all natural light." And she was like, no, I mean, because you might be aware of the fact that the sun moves. So we can't shoot a scene all day in quote unquote natural light and make it seem like it's a scene that took place over 5 minutes. So it's all lit. Um, but that's her wonderful talent.
That
That's
is
the
the scene.
magic.
Yeah, that is the sign of a good of a good lighting person. Speaking of the school, you have also attended these conservative boarding schools in India. So you're writing from firsthand experience. And I went to an all girls Catholic school, so I saw a lot of similarities with the strictness and the suppression of sorts. So I'm curious to know, have you visited these schools? Have you spoken with kids at these schools? Has there been any progress in recent years? Because I get an annual newsletter from my school and I see little things and I'm like, okay, I see that they're trying, but it's still very much a place where time stood still.
Yeah, I mean, I went to a school which had a very similar ethos, but I did not go to a boarding school. Boarding schools were a fascination of mine, and so I set the film in a boarding school. However, the ethos of my school, and honestly, every school I knew in India, whether it was like a Catholic school, whether it was like a Hindu school or a secular school or an international school, they all had the same ethos where as soon as you became a teenager, you were constantly under surveillance for your behavior. Just everything was police. What are you wearing? Why are you talking to this boy? Don't bend over that desk like that. Your skirt is riding up. Aren't you aware? Like, so this constant shaming of anything to do with sexuality, anything to do with desire, um, was so present and was something that I wanted to reflect. And I wondered that how this was, I went to school in the 90s, and I'm like, I wondered, is this still, how relevant is it now? And I'm no longer in these schools, but when I speak to young people who watch these films, or I also read every review that shows up on Letterboxd. So I'm reading these things that young people are writing, and they're like, "Oh, this is my school. This is my life." Uh, and so, unfortunately, sometimes I think the outward trappings have changed. For instance, in the film, Mira goes to buy a skirt, which is like a skirt
Yeah.
short combination, and it's like short. And it was very scandalous if you did that in the 90s because Western pop culture and clothing came to India for the first time in the 90s. So to be able to buy these things was very new and an act of rebellion. But now, if you go to India, everyone is wearing, in any town, you can find people wearing jeans. In villages, you can find lots of people wearing um, clothes that would be indistinguishable from any country in the US. So outwardly, it may have changed, but inwardly, I think the amount of freedom that is accorded to women, or, how women who have any amount of power, like Mira, who becomes the head prefect of the school, and how they're treated and how fragile that is, all of that seems unfortunately very, very similar to me.
Mm. This is kind of leading into my last question around this film. I do want to know if you're able to screen this in India. And also, what are the conversations coming out after the screenings? I know you premiered or you showed it at Sundance last year. And congratulations on the Independent Spirit Award nominations. We love that's our favorite award show. But what culturally conversations are you having?
Yeah, so it premiered in India first at a film festival. It's the big Indian film festival that happens in Bombay called Mami. And it was amazing to attend those screenings. I mean, they were packed, and I was a little nervous because of the sexuality. I was wondering how it would be received. And I've like stopped watching the film at festivals because I've just watched it so many times. But in India, I sat in. And I felt nervous, like I was watching it with my uncles and aunties, and that would be that uh, like our pearl clutching energy of like, why so much sex? I felt that. Um, and I felt there was a kind of how should I say, like a tensing of the audience when those moments happened, like places where a Western audience would laugh and Indian audience was a little uncomfortable. And yet they would also laugh at these other things that, they've done, like given signals through the landline and covering the phone with like a towel, just like big laughs because I'm like, oh yeah, all of you have been up to these shenanigans, so you've what's going on. And so I was really waiting anxiously for the end of the screening, and the conversations were just incredible. I mean, so many people, it's so moved and in tears to be like, I've never seen myself reflected on screen this way. I've never seen this part of my experience. There are things that I don't think I've even named to myself that I sort of saw on screen, or I felt like a part of me was healed. A part of my teenage self felt healed by watching this film. So very moving. I think after the first screening, all of us cried just first screening in India. It was just like, while we were talking to people, just unabashedly. So it was super moving. And then in December, it released on Amazon Prime, also in India. And I think it's done very well. It's a little baby film, but it was for the first 10 days or so, it was within the top 10 streaming films in India, which is uh, pretty miraculous for a little film in a country which produces many films, mega films with big stars. So it's found its little corner. And occasionally there's somebody being like, "Oh, what's that smut?" I'll read that on Letterboxd. But by and large, the reviews are moving, very moving, especially from young men sometimes who'll say, "Oh, I'm thinking of my mom differently. I feel like I want to give my mom like a head massage." Or, just like tender things, or like somebody being like, "This is making me think of the privilege that I have in a way. It's making me feel it in a way that no lecture could." And those things are so gratifying.
After speaking with you, it's easy to see why this film is so tender and so touching. That scene when they're
Yes.
dancing is
Yeah.
just so sweet. I love it. I love that song. Keri Nazer.
Thank you for saying that. Also, the composer of that song, Sneha Khanwalkar, she's amazing. One of the few women composers who like are considered A-list composers in Bollywood. She's such a fierce badass. And we had so much fun because it's like a throwback to 90s Bollywood songs that we grew up listening to, where we both said we want to create this song where you want to have like your private bathroom dancing moment to it. You don't want anyone to come in and interrupt, least of all your mom. So
Correct.
Yes,
I
1,000,000%.
nailed
And if
it.
your mom's got moves like that, I'm like, okay,
Right.
mom, geez.
Yeah.
It deserves all the accolades in the world. You can watch it right now on Amazon Prime. We've been speaking with director and writer Shuchi Talati of Girls Will Be Girls. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. It's been so fun being here.
Thanks for joining us on today's show. You can find more information about this episode in our show notes.
If you're missing us, you can visit us at bitchtalkpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter and buy us a cup of coffee.
Did you know we're also on the radio? You can find us at bff.fm.
And lastly, rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. All the cool bitches are doing it.
This podcast is a proud member of the BFF.fm podcast network. Learn more at podcast.bff.fm.
BFF.fm, best frequencies forever.